The same weather system that produced widespread severe weather that included damaging winds up to 75 miles an hour, hail over 5 inches, and multiple tornadoes, which potentially reached violent intensity, is back again today, and it's going to be producing more widespread severe weather that's going to include all hazards. So that's a possibility for strong tornadoes, wind potentially being near 75 miles an hour, and hail luckily isn't going to be nearly as big of a risk today. Probably won't see anything over 2 inches in diameter, and 1.5 inches in diameter might even be pushing it. Now, a big takeaway from this is that it's going to likely be for 90 million people. That is how many people are under this risk. And this is a risk that's really going to last starting all the way in the morning, and it's going to last all the way until sunset, with a big line of thunderstorms moving east across the risk area. So starting with our ingredients, we're going to have a lot of forcing and just a lot of flow at 500 millibars. And as you can see, there are just a bunch of kinks in here. And also we're looking for kinks that are kind of highlighted by areas with increased flow. Like one is going to be right here near Arkansas, Mississippi, and Tennessee. This might be an area to watch in the morning hours for some storms. And then we can see kind of all the way up. It's a little bit of a messy ejection all the way up here in the Northeast in the morning. There's absolutely going to be ample flow for these storms today to produce severe hazards. Then also we're going to look at a 700 millibar trough that's going to be focused quite a bit more on our northeastern risk area out of the two. And this is the main reason I think this risk area actually has a greater potential to produce damaging winds, hail, and tornadoes than its southern counterpart down here. Other things like dew point is going to be fairly abundant. This is another day where we've seen super high dew points advected very far northward. In the south, we're probably dealing with mid 65s to 70s dew point. That's very moist. And then up here in the northeast, we're dealing with, again, mid dew points around 65. That's going to be very moist. And also the temps going to be pretty warm. Really the only thing that could kind of hinder our risk up here is going to be Lake Erie. That could actually get in the way. We saw Lake Michigan get in the way of our risk yesterday, but still pretty warm all the way up. We're going to have a couple of embedded lows. We just have a general area of low pressure across here, but it looks like the biggest area of low pressure is going to be up in the northeast. One of the reasons why I also think the area has a greater potential of producing those hazards. Now moving on to our Cape, it's going to be pretty unstable, and the ingredients in front of this are going to be really good. We're looking at, even in the morning hours, we're seeing abundant Cape up here in front of our northeastern storms. This would be anywhere between 1,500 to 2,000. Even in the morning across our southern risk area, it looks like we could see isolated areas that have anywhere between 750 up to 1,200 Cape. Then, of course, as we go into the afternoon, I think that's probably when both of our storm areas are going to peak, especially our southern risk area. And then I think mid-afternoon to late afternoon is probably going to be prime time for our system moving up through the northeast. And here's our supercell composite. We can see all the way throughout the day. It's going to be pretty solid right in front of our line. And I think there's going to be a really good maintenance of our line and not a lot of it slowing down, with really the potential for severe storms really from sunrise through sunset. Even looking at our significant tornado parameter, there's going to be a lot of the same thing. Even in the morning hours up here in the northeast, the ingredients are going to be really solid for a couple of spin ups. This is really going to be hindered by about one thing right now, and that is going to be some messy morning convection. It looks like there's actually going to be a decent bit of it come around sunrise, and that could actually hinder the environment a lot. And just messy convection makes severe weather less favorable. It looks like things are going to clear out though, and it's not really going to hinder the environment that terribly by probably a little bit around 11 a.m. And then I think that's when we'll actually start to see our severe threat really start to ramp up from there, with probably a peak around mid-afternoon across our entire line. And then it looks like we could see a little bit of a MCS kind of dig in. Look how much flow is going to be backed into this line down here in the south. One of the reasons why I think this could actually be an area to watch as we go later into the night. And another ingredient I didn't mention is going to be our 3 cape, which is really vital for tornadoes and just general severe weather. We're going to see that we have a really favorable plume really all the way up our line. Then, of course, those shear vectors are going to be parallel to our initiating boundary, which is going to be a cold front, which sharpens through the day, even going up here into our northern risk area. Same thing. We're seeing a lot of 3 cape values over 100, even over 150, flirting with 200. That's going to be extremely favorable for all of these storms. And now for a little bit more of a deep dive on what these storms could look like. Once again, in the morning, it looks like concentration of these storms and the widespreadness of them might actually be lacking. I did mention we could have something a little bit stronger as we'll have a little shortwave moving through this Arkansas, Mississippi, Tennessee area in the morning down in the southeast. At that point, there's going to be a fairly favorable environment in front of this. Would not be surprised to see it produce damaging winds, pretty small hail. I don't think hail is going to be much of a risk with this because how linear the storm mode is going to be. And then look at these shear vectors pretty parallel to our line. That's kind of an indicator that a tornado threat would be elevated. So even spin up tornadoes in the morning hours aren't going to be completely off the table. That's kind of why the SPC has that entire area outlined as we go throughout the day. And then, like I said, probably around 11, we start to see our storm coverage kind of fill out. And then at this point, there's going to be a pretty favorable environment in front of these guys. Maybe up here around Mississippi, Tennessee during this time, things are sort of cooling off and we see those storms kind of give out as they've kind of spent all their energy up here. But down south, looks like we're going to see a bit of a MCS kind of form. It looks like there could be a line of confluence in front of this. This could mean a couple of prefrontal cells, which would actually have a pretty favorable environment to work with. And those could definitely produce all hazards of severe weather. Or B, it's going to kind of just screw up the environment for this until it kind of crashes into it and they can combine and work together, which looks like that wouldn't happen until later down the road. Still at this point, we're seeing all hazards of severe weather, mostly just a spin-up tornado threat and mostly a damaging wind threat. Now for our northeastern risk, it looks like it's going to kind of follow the opposite pattern. In the morning, we're going to have a lot of messy storm coverage. It's going to be really hard for these storms to get organized with all of this morning convection. Nevertheless, though, we have our low pressure system. Back here, we have a warm front, a really solid amount of warm air advecting during this time. That's also one of the key reasons why we're seeing all of this messy stuff right in front of this line. But the ingredients overall, like we talked about, really solid. If we can see a couple of storms cluster together and get their act together, would not be surprised to see some severe storms up here. But it looks like, once again, kind of like the south, probably around midday, we see things get their act a little bit more together. And then at this point up here, it looks like this is going to be more of a quality over quantity setup here, where we have a couple of embedded cells that would have the potential to produce tornadoes, damaging winds, and even some small hail. But that risk is going to really fizzle out and be done by the time we go into nightfall. But I think during the mid to late afternoon, we are really going to want to watch this area for some very serious severe weather. And lastly, these are just going to be a couple of integrated weather soundings that were generated by the NAM model, and definitely think it's showing a fairly favorable environment for all hazards of severe weather. This is going to be in our southern risk area. We're seeing around 1,500 joules per kilogram of CAPE, close to 175.3 CAPE. And then our shear parameters, especially our effective shear, this is what's going to organize and kind of keep up the storm maintenance for these storms, is around 60 knots. That is very, very good for storm maintenance, and especially because this is about 20 knots over what we would really want to see. Also, in the lower levels, our effective shear is going to be around 200 SRH and around 30 knots of low-level shear. We're looking for around 50 or 150 SRH and 20 knots of low shear for a tornado threat. So definitely going to be over that. We also see a good curvature in the low levels and then kind of elongates out. We are seeing a little bit of a M or S-shaped photograph. So that could actually hinder these storms. But because we have all that forcing at 500 millibars, we have all of this organizing shear. Because it's just going to be a linear storm mode, that shouldn't be as big of a deal. Other things to note: pretty solid looking thermodynamic profile. Our lapse rates aren't going to be the best all the way up, and we don't really have a bunch of mixed level cape right up here, also further hindering that hail threat. But the main things, we've got 75 over 64, a little bit of drier loft to help with the stronger downdrafts and some damaging winds. And we're not really seeing any capping. So overall, really solid there. And these storms are going to be surface based. And now we're pivoting towards a sounding generated from the northeastern risk area. And it's going to become pretty evident why I think this area could have the chance to produce some pretty significant severe weather. It looks like our cape is going to be close to 2003 cape, still over 150. That's super good. We're seeing 73 over 62, more than enough moisture to work. Surface-based storms, winds, kind of turning and strengthening with height. And we do have a couple of little warm noses out here. One of the reasons why storm coverage isn't super certain out here, especially with that morning convection, but it looks like that shouldn't affect it as much. So overall, not a bad thermodynamic profile at all. The main thing is going to be the shear. Now, our effective shear is about the same, 55 to 60 knots of effective shear. Still, though, can't understate how good that is for storm maintenance. The main difference is going to be the shear in our lower levels. Look at the curvature in this photograph and how streamwise that flow is. That is very good for tornadoes, and especially because our effective inflow is going to be about 40 knots of low-level shear in close to 320 SRH. That's about double what we're looking for in all of those fields. So if we can get a couple of cells that are ingesting some of this warm, moist, and very spinny air, I definitely would not be surprised to see a tornado, and I'm not even going to rule out strong tornadoes in this area. I think if we're going to see big severe weather that really characterizes the day, it's going to come from this northeastern sector. Now, the final thing I want to talk about, which I kind of missed on in yesterday's forecast, is the flooding threat. There's obviously going to be quite a bit of rain with this, and so much rain that the SPC has highlighted a very large area for excessive rainfall. Looks like the area to focus on is going to be out here in the Gulf states or the southeast, potentially up to 2 to 6 inches of rainfall accumulation. Then in this marginal risk, not as much to worry about. We're looking at probably 1 to 3 inches of accumulation, but of course, stay up to date and look for any of those flash flood warnings, because those definitely are going to be out and about today.